She missed the biggest interview of her life to help a stranger on the street. What she didn't know was that he was the CEO of the company she was desperate to join. Will this selfless act lead to a second chance or destroy everything? Stay tuned to discover how one choice could change everything. The cold drizzle soaked through Olivia Green's thin coat as she stood on the busy sidewalk of Chicago. The wind picked up, cutting through her clothes like a knife, but she didn't care. She was already running late, and the interview at Falcon Communications, the opportunity of a lifetime, was slipping further away with each passing second. She raised her arm desperately, watching yellow taxis zoom past her, splashing water onto the pavement. Not a single one stopped. "Come on, please," she muttered under her breath, glancing at her watch. 8:27 a.m. She had less than half an hour to reach the skyscraper in downtown Chicago where the biggest interview of her life awaited. This job was her chance to break, free from the cycle of dead-end jobs and part-time gigs. If she could just make it in time. A black sedan slowed near the curb, and Olivia took a hopeful step forward. But before she could reach it, a businessman in an expensive suit slid into the back seat, the door shutting behind him with a finality that felt like a punch in the stomach. She let out a frustrated sigh, checking her phone again. No ride-sharing apps had cars available nearby. The subway now? That would take far too long. And the clock was ticking faster than ever. "Are you kidding me?" She groaned aloud, her heart racing as she calculated how quickly she could run to the bus stop a few blocks away. She was running out of options, but she couldn't just give up. Then, as if the universe was playing a cruel joke, a commotion caught her eye. A man in a dark grey suit staggered near a lamppost, one hand clutching his chest. His neatly combed dark hair was damp from the rain, but there was something about him, something undeniably fragile in the way he swayed, struggling to keep his balance. And then, in a blink, he collapsed. Olivia's breath hitched. For a moment, she froze. People passed by, brushing past him without so much as a glance. No one stopped. The crowd moved on, indifferent to his plight, assuming someone else would step in. And for a brief moment, Olivia thought of doing the same. She was already so late, so close to the most important moment of her life. But as she looked back at him, there was something in the man's face, a quiet desperation, his brow furrowed in pain. He needed help, and it wasn't like her to turn away from someone in need. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. She glanced at her watch again. She could run to the bus stop now, catch a ride, and still make it to the interview, though it would be cutting it close. The job was waiting. But could she really walk away from a person in trouble? "Just leave me," the man muttered, his voice barely audible as he lay there on the cold sidewalk, eyes half-lidded with exhaustion. The words cut through her like a knife, but Olivia's mind was made up. "No," she whispered under her breath, her voice firm, though her heart was racing. She didn't even hesitate. Without another thought, Olivia rushed to his side, kneeling down onto the wet pavement. "Sir, can you hear me?" Her voice trembled slightly, but she tried to remain calm, her breath coming in shallow bursts. His breath was shallow, his forehead slick with sweat despite the cold rain. She could see how pale he was, his pulse weak. Despite his outward composure, his perfectly pressed suit, his polished shoes, he was clearly in distress. His piercing blue eyes blinked slowly, trying to focus on her face. "Please, help me," he murmured again, his voice barely more than a whisper. Olivia swallowed hard. She had to act fast. There was no time to waste. She quickly grabbed her phone, dialing 911. "I have a man in his mid-30s collapsed on 5th Avenue near East 42nd. He's conscious but weak, possibly cardiac-related. Please send an ambulance." She exhaled in relief as the operator confirmed. Help was on the way, but then the thought hit her like a freight train. She couldn't leave him now. Not yet. Her fingers were frozen as she shrugged off her coat and placed it gently under his head to shield him from the cold pavement. He blinked up at her, dazed, his intense blue eyes locking with hers for a moment, but there was something more in them now, a flicker of gratitude mixed with vulnerability. She didn't know how long she sat with him, holding his wrist, feeling the faint but steady pulse beneath her fingers. The city buzzed around them, but it felt like she and this stranger were in their own world. Time slowed down. And yet, the realization hit her like a punch. The interview. It was over. Her heart plummeted as the ambulance arrived, the sirens shrieking through the air. 2 paramedics jumped out, quickly assessing the situation. "She's a hero," one of them said as he moved in to help the man onto the stretcher. Olivia could only nod, feeling a brief flash of relief as she watched them take him away. But She didn't have time to feel any sense of satisfaction. She was late. Her heart pounded with the weight of her choices, and she turned back to the office building, her steps quickening as the minutes slipped away. Olivia's feet pounded against the slick pavement as she sprinted towards the gleaming glass doors of Falcon Communications, her heart racing faster with each step. Her soaked shoes squeaked embarrassingly as she entered the modern, sleek lobby, but the pain in her chest wasn't from the physical exertion. It was the gnawing feeling that her chance at this job was slipping through her fingers. She pushed through the revolving doors and was met with the polished marble floors and a grand chandelier that illuminated the vast open lobby. The receptionist, a woman in a navy blazer, barely looked up as Olivia approached, breathless and drenched from head to toe. I'm here for the executive assistant interview, Olivia panted, gripping the counter for support, trying to steady her breath. She could barely think, her mind spinning in a frenzy of thoughts. How had it all gone wrong? The receptionist's eyes flicked toward the clock behind her, then to the screen on her computer. Your name? Olivia Green. The receptionist typed quickly, her fingers flying across the keyboard. After a brief pause, she glanced up at Olivia. Sorry, Miss Green, she said in a perfectly detached tone. The interview ended 30 hours. Minutes ago. A wave of panic surged through Olivia. No, please, she said quickly, her voice cracking. I had an emergency. I was helping someone who collapsed on the street. I couldn't just leave him there. The receptionist didn't even flinch. Her expression remained stoic as she folded her hands in front of her. I understand, but Mr. Reynolds, our hiring manager, was very clear about punctuality. The final candidates have already been selected. Olivia's stomach dropped to her feet. She had worked so hard for this moment. It had taken years of balancing 2 part-time jobs and studying at night to even get the interview. And now it was slipping away because she had done the right thing. Why did life have to be this way? The thought clawed at her chest. Please, Olivia's voice wavered as she gripped the counter. Just let me talk to him. I'll explain, I promise. The receptionist eyed her for a moment, a glint of hesitation in her eyes. After what felt like an eternity, she picked up the phone and dialed an extension. Mr. Reynolds, I have a candidate here. Her name is Olivia Green. She missed her time slot, but she's requesting a moment of your time. A brief silence followed, and then the receptionist spoke again. Understood. She hung up the phone and turned back to Olivia. He'll see you, but only for a moment. Olivia's heart soared with a flicker of hope, but it was short-lived. This wasn't the way it was supposed to happen. She had missed the interview, the one moment that could change everything, and now all she had left was a brief conversation with the man who might decide her future. The hallway stretched out in front of her, the minimalist design reflecting the corporate professionalism of Falcon Communications. As she was led down the long corridor by the receptionist, Olivia's mind raced. The sound of her wet shoes against the marble floors echoed in the stillness of the building. When they reached the office at the end of the hall, the receptionist knocked on the door before entering. A tall, sharply dressed man in his early 40s, with a commanding presence and dark hair that was perfectly combed, stood behind a glass desk. This was Daniel Reynolds, head of HR at Falcon Communications and the man who would decide her fate. Miss Green, he greeted, his voice professional but carrying an unmistakable air of impatience. You missed your interview. I'm sorry, Olivia said quickly, her voice breathless. She tried to calm herself, but the words came out in a rush. There was an emergency. A man collapsed on the sidewalk and I couldn't just leave him there. I understand, Daniel interrupted, raising a hand to silence her, but his tone remained firm. But punctuality is key. This position requires extreme reliability. Our executives deal with billion-dollar decisions every day. If an assistant fails to show up on time, it could cost millions. His words hit Olivia like a punch. The realization that she had lost her chance because of a momentary act of kindness made her feel small. She had always prided herself on being the one to show up, on time, every time. And now, here she was, asking for a chance she knew she didn't deserve. I'm sorry for being late, Mr. Reynolds, she said quietly, her voice thick with the weight of her failure. I understand if I've lost my chance, but I wanted you to know that I didn't take being late lightly. I made the choice to help someone who needed it. Daniel studied her for a moment, his fingers tapping lightly against the desk. He didn't speak for what felt like an eternity, but Olivia didn't dare break the silence. She had said what needed to be said, and now it was up to him. Daniel said finally, a small nod indicating that he was considering her words. That's admirable. But let me ask you this, Miss Green. If you were already employed here and you had an urgent deadline, but chose to help a stranger instead, what would happen? Olivia hesitated. I would still do the right thing, she said slowly. But I would make sure to communicate with my team, find a solution, and make up for any lost time. Daniel's gaze softened, though his expression remained unreadable. That's what I wanted to hear, he said, his voice firm but not unkind. This job requires someone who can balance personal integrity with the demands of a high-pressure role. There was a long pause, and Olivia felt like her heart had stopped beating in her chest. Could it be? Was he actually considering her? Or was this just a polite dismissal, a way to let her down easy? Finally, Daniel spoke again, his voice quieter now. I think I'll give you a chance. You won't be starting in the position you interviewed for. Instead, I want you to work with me on a special project I've been overseeing. If you prove yourself, there may be a permanent place for you here. Olivia stared at him, her mind trying to process what he had just said. A chance. Her pulse quickened as she realized that against all odds, she still had a shot at this dream job. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I won't let you down. The next few days felt like a blur to Olivia. She could hardly believe what had happened. After missing the interview, after all the desperate moments that had led her to this point, she had a second chance. Daniel Reynolds, the CEO of Falcon Communications, had given her an opportunity she never expected. But that didn't mean it would be easy. The first day she walked into the office, she could feel the weight of her decision. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stood before the sleek, towering skyscraper of Falcon Communications. The building loomed over her, a symbol of the world she had fought so hard to break into. But now, as an intern working directly with Daniel, it felt like she was being thrust into a world she was barely ready for. The glass doors slid open before her, and the rush of cold air from the air conditioning hit her face. The lobby of Falcon Communications was just as impressive as she remembered. Polished marble floors, a massive chandelier hanging from the ceiling, and sleek white walls adorned with modern art. Everything about the space exuded power and control. Olivia stood for a moment, taking it all in. The office was not just a place of work, it was a fortress. A place where every move, every decision could change the course of someone's life. Her life. Miss Green. A voice pulled her from her thoughts. She turned to see a tall, sharply dressed man in his early 30s standing by the elevator, his arms crossed. She recognized him immediately, one of the senior executives from Daniel's team. He had a cold, impassive expression that reminded Olivia just how high the stakes were. Mr. Maxwell, right? Olivia asked, trying to maintain her composure. Yes, he said curtly. I'll show you to your desk. Don't expect any special treatment. Just get to work. Olivia nodded, swallowing her nerves. She followed him through the sleek hallways, each turn leading her deeper into the corporate maze. Her new desk was small, tucked away in the corner of a large open-plan office. A computer sat in front of her, and she could already hear the murmur of voices from the other workers. It was overwhelming. She sat down, took a deep breath, and opened the laptop. She was here. She had made it this far. Now all she had to do was prove she belonged. For the first week, Olivia worked tirelessly. She answered calls, scheduled meetings, and helped with whatever tasks were thrown her way. But it was different this time. She wasn't just doing the work, she was learning from it. Each task she completed, no matter how small, brought her closer to understanding the complexity of the business. Daniel had tasked her with a special project, something to prove her worth. It was a marketing campaign for one of Falcon Communications' biggest clients, a major tech company. Olivia knew that if she could make a strong impression on this project, it might open doors for her. But the pressure was mounting. Every person she interacted with seemed to be watching her, judging her every move. How's the campaign coming along? Daniel asked one afternoon as he passed her desk. His presence, as always, was commanding. He didn't stop to chat for long, but his question lingered in the air. It's going well, Mr. Reynolds, Olivia replied, her voice steady despite the storm of nerves inside her. I've completed the initial research, and I'm drafting the first round of strategies. He nodded approvingly. Good. Keep me updated. I'll be in the conference room. As he walked away, Olivia couldn't help but feel the weight of his words. She had to prove herself not just as an intern, but as someone who could take on real responsibilities. She had always dreamed of being part of this world, and now that she was in it, she had to step up. No more mistakes, no more second chances. Days turned into weeks, and Olivia's confidence began to grow. She faced challenges, of course. There were moments when the pressure felt unbearable, and moments when she doubted herself. But she refused to give in. She worked late nights, poring over data, perfecting her presentations, and refining her strategies. She even caught a few mistakes from her colleagues, which earned her respect among the other interns. And through it all, Daniel was there, always watching. Sometimes he would stop by her desk, offering a word of encouragement or a quick piece of advice. Other times he would challenge her in meetings, pushing her to think harder, to dig deeper. Olivia couldn't deny the growing connection between them. It was subtle at first, a lingering glance, a smile that lasted just a little longer than necessary. But it was undeniable. One evening, as the office was beginning to empty, Olivia found herself working late on the project. She was alone in the conference room, reviewing the presentation slides she had prepared for the client meeting the next day. She was so focused that she didn't hear Daniel enter the room until he spoke. "You're still here?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. Olivia looked up, surprised to see him standing in the doorway. "I'm almost done," she said, forcing a smile. "Just putting the finishing touches on the campaign." Daniel walked into the room, closing the door behind him. "You've been putting in a lot of late nights," he remarked. There was a slight tone of approval in his voice. "I'm impressed." Olivia nodded, unsure of how to respond. "I'm just doing my best." He moved closer, his eyes scanning the presentation on the screen. "I can see that, but don't burn yourself out. We need you sharp for tomorrow's pitch." "I won't," Olivia replied softly, her gaze meeting his. There was something in his eyes, a flicker of warmth, perhaps even admiration. For a moment, the world outside the conference room seemed to disappear. "You're doing great, Olivia," he said, his voice quieter now, more personal. She felt a rush of warmth at the compliment. She didn't know why, but the way he spoke to her made her feel seen, truly seen, something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Later that night, as Olivia sat alone in the quiet office, she couldn't help but reflect on the path that had brought her here. The chance meeting with the stranger on the street, her decision to help him, the missed interview, all of it had led her to this moment. But there was still more to prove, and the path ahead, though uncertain, felt like it was finally within her reach. Olivia had been working at Falcon Communications for over a month now. The pace was relentless, and every day felt like a test of her strength and perseverance. She had learned more in this short time than she had in the years spent trying to break into the corporate world. But still, there was something unspoken between her and Daniel Reynolds, something that tugged at her heart every time he walked past her desk or offered her a word of encouragement. Despite the challenges she faced, Olivia had proven herself to be a capable and valuable member of the team. She had successfully helped finalize the campaign for their largest client, and it was set to launch the following week. The project had become her passion, and for the first time in a long while, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. But as the days passed, the line between professional admiration and personal feelings began to blur. It started with small moments, shared glances in meetings, an unexpected compliment after a presentation, and the quiet conversations that stretched a little too long. Olivia found herself wondering, did Daniel feel the same way? It wasn't just the way he looked at her, but the way he saw her. He didn't just see her as the intern who made coffee runs and answered emails. He saw her potential. He pushed her to be better, to rise above her doubts, to trust her instincts. And in turn, she found herself admiring him more than she had expected. But this wasn't just about attraction. It was about respect. He wasn't like the other executives she'd worked with, cold and detached. Daniel had an intensity about him that was magnetic, and the more she got to know him, the harder it became to ignore the growing pull between them. It was a Thursday evening when things finally came to a head. The office was nearly empty, save for a few late-night workers finishing their tasks. Olivia sat at her desk, her eyes bleary from hours of staring at her screen. She had been putting together a proposal for a new project, and though the work was demanding, she had a sense of pride in how far she had come. Suddenly, the door to her office opened, and there stood Daniel, his tie slightly loosened, sleeves rolled up. His usual composed demeanor was replaced with something softer. For a split second, Olivia's breath caught in her throat. There was something different about him tonight, something that made her pulse quicken. "You still here?" he asked, his voice low but not without a touch of amusement. Olivia forced a smile, though she could feel the nervous flutter in her chest. Just wrapping up a few things, she said, trying to sound casual, even though her heart was racing. Daniel stepped into the room, leaning against the doorframe as he observed her work. "You've been putting in a lot of hours," he remarked, his tone thoughtful. "I admire your dedication." She shrugged, trying to downplay it. "It's part of the job." He chuckled softly, his eyes meeting hers. "It's more than that, Olivia. You're not just doing the job, you're owning it." Her cheeks flushed at the compliment, but she didn't let herself get distracted. "Thank you," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just doing my best." Daniel took a step closer, his gaze still fixed on her. There was a pause, a quiet moment that seemed to stretch between them, heavy with unspoken words. "I don't think you realize just how much you've impressed everyone here," he said, his voice softer now. "Especially me." Olivia's heart skipped a beat. She wanted to say something, to express the way his words made her feel, but she couldn't find the right words. She had spent so much time focusing on proving herself professionally, she hadn't allowed herself to consider the personal connection that seemed to be growing between them. But as he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the small office, she couldn't deny the tension between them anymore. She felt it in the way his eyes lingered on her, in the way her own breath hitched whenever he was near. "Daniel," she started, her voice shaky. But before she could say anything more, he reached out, gently taking her hand in his. His touch was warm and reassuring, and for a moment she thought she might lose herself in it. "Olivia," he said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper. "I need you to know something." Her heart raced. Was he about to say what she thought he was? "You've been everything I didn't expect," he continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're smart, determined, and kind. I admire you more than I've allowed myself to admit." A rush of warmth flooded her chest at his words. She didn't know what to say, but she didn't have to say anything. His fingers gently brushed her cheek, and for the first time it felt like they were both acknowledging what had been building between them. The connection, the attraction, the respect. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the moment shifted. Daniel stepped back, his expression hardening once more, though there was a flicker of something in his eyes. A vulnerability, maybe, that Olivia couldn't quite place. "I have to go," he said, his voice steady again. "There's a meeting I need to attend. We'll finish this conversation later." Olivia nodded, though she didn't understand what had just happened. She watched him walk out of the room, his steps purposeful, his posture straight. And yet, the tension still lingered in the air, leaving her heart pounding in her chest. That night, as Olivia lay in bed, she couldn't stop replaying the scene over and over in her head. What did it all mean? Was Daniel starting to feel the same way she did? Or was she just reading too much into it? The uncertainty gnawed at her, but one thing was clear. Whatever happened next, she was no longer just the intern. She was part of something bigger now, something that was starting to feel like more than just work. And that thought terrified her just as much as it excited her. The days after that late-night encounter felt different for Olivia. The air between her and Daniel was thick with unspoken words, and she couldn't help but feel the weight of their last conversation hanging in the space between them. Every glance, every word seemed to carry more significance than before. As much as she tried to focus on her work and keep her emotions in check, she couldn't ignore the way her heart fluttered whenever he walked into a room, or the way her thoughts inevitably turned to him, even when she was busy with her tasks. But she couldn't afford to let her personal feelings get in the way of her career. Not now. She had fought so hard to get to this point, to be part of Falcon Communications, and she wasn't about to let anything, especially a complicated relationship, derail her dreams. Still, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing, something bigger than she could control. The next day, as Olivia worked through her usual pile of tasks, the door to her office opened and she looked up to find Daniel standing there, his eyes searching her face. His presence was commanding, and despite the warm glow of the office lights, he seemed to bring a chill with him, a chill that made her heart race. "Olivia," he said, his voice steady, though there was an underlying tension to it. "I need you in my office, now." Her stomach flipped as she quickly gathered her things, trying to maintain her composure. What did this mean? Was she being reassigned? Or worse, was her time at Falcon Communications coming to an abrupt end? The thought gnawed at her as she followed him through the labyrinth of hallways to his office. the heavy doors closing behind them with an almost ominous finality. Inside his office, the atmosphere felt different. The sleek modern space was typically cold and professional, but today it felt more personal. The lighting was dimmer, and the silence was more pronounced. "Sit," Daniel said, gesturing toward one of the plush chairs in front of his glass desk. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, something Olivia couldn't quite read. As she sat, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, she could feel the weight of his gaze on her. It wasn't just the gaze of a superior. It was the gaze of someone who had seen her struggle, seen her work tirelessly to prove herself. But that same gaze was now searching for something more. "I've been watching you, Olivia," Daniel began, his tone measured. "And I've come to a conclusion. You're not just an intern anymore. You've earned a place here. And that means I'm offering you a permanent role within my team." Olivia's heart skipped a beat. "A permanent role?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her mind struggling to catch up with what he was saying. "Yes," Daniel confirmed, his expression softening ever so slightly. "Not as an intern anymore. I want you to be my executive assistant, overseeing all of my major projects." For a moment, Olivia could only stare at him, shock and disbelief mixing in her chest. This was everything she had worked for, the job she had dreamed of, the position she had fought for. But at the same time, the idea of working so closely with Daniel, someone she had started to feel so much for, was both exhilarating and terrifying. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "I never thought this would happen." Daniel's gaze softened, a rare glimpse of warmth in his eyes. "You've earned it, Olivia. You've proven yourself time and time again, and I believe you're the best person for the job. But there's one thing I need to make clear," he said, his voice lowering slightly. Olivia's pulse quickened. "What's that?" "Whatever happens," Daniel said, taking a step closer, his eyes not leaving hers. "This relationship, our professional relationship, will come first. I need to know that you're ready for that. No distractions." His words stung, and yet they made sense. Daniel was making it clear that any feelings between them, any attraction, had to be kept in check. Their work was what mattered, and that couldn't be jeopardized. Olivia swallowed hard, nodding. "I understand," she said, her voice steady, even though her heart was racing. "I won't let anything get in the way." The next few days were a whirlwind. Olivia found herself stepping into a role she had only dreamed of, overseeing high-stakes projects and working directly with Daniel in ways she never imagined. She quickly proved herself as a capable and valuable member of the team, taking on challenges with confidence and skill. The respect she had earned from her colleagues, especially Daniel, made all the late nights, the struggles, and the sacrifices worth it. But as she continued to excel professionally, the feelings between her and Daniel became harder to ignore. The tension was palpable. Every time they exchanged a glance, every time their hands brushed in the office, it felt like there was something more than just a professional connection. But neither of them spoke of it. It wasn't until the night of the company's annual gala that everything changed. The event was grand, held in one of the most prestigious venues in Chicago. The city skyline glittered in the distance, and the atmosphere was electric with excitement and anticipation. Olivia had never been to an event like this before, and as she walked into the ballroom, she couldn't help but feel out of place. The attendees were wealthy, powerful, people who had built their fortunes on ambition and grit. Olivia, though, proud of how far she had come, still felt like an outsider in this world. She was standing near the bar when she felt a tap on her shoulder. Turning, she found Daniel standing there, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity she hadn't seen before. "You look beautiful tonight," he said, his voice low, his gaze lingering on her. Olivia's heart skipped a beat. He had always been professional, but tonight something felt different. The way he looked at her, the way his smile lingered. It was more than just a compliment. "Thank you," she replied, feeling a blush creep up her cheeks. There was a long pause, and then to her surprise, Daniel stepped closer. The space between them felt charged, and for a moment everything else in the room disappeared. "Olivia," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been trying to fight this, but I can't anymore. I've tried to keep things professional, but you've become someone I can't stop thinking about." The words hit her like a wave, sweeping away any thoughts of professionalism, of boundaries, of the career she had worked so hard to build. "I feel the same way," Olivia whispered, her breath shaky as she met his gaze. And in that moment, in the grand ballroom surrounded by power and prestige, the world seemed to stop. They were no longer just the CEO and his assistant, no longer just colleagues. They were two people who had found something real in a world full of distractions. Daniel leaned in, his lips brushing against hers in a kiss that was both gentle and intense. A kiss that spoke of all the things they hadn't said before, the things that had been building between them for so long. The kiss lingered in Olivia's memory long after the gala had ended. She had always imagined what it might be like to be with someone like Daniel. Powerful, confident, a man who commanded respect from everyone around him. But what she hadn't expected was how he would make her feel, how he saw her not just as an intern, not just as someone working under him, but as someone who could stand beside him equally. But reality set in the following morning as Olivia walked into the office. The connection they had shared the night before hung between them like an unspoken agreement. They hadn't spoken of the kiss, not yet. She was still trying to process what it meant, what it would mean for both her career and her personal life. Was it just a momentary lapse in judgment, a fleeting attraction? Or was this something more, something that could evolve into something real? The next morning, Olivia arrived early, just as she always did. The office was quiet, the hum of the city outside the window, a distant echo as she sat at her desk, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. But as the hours passed, the tension between her and Daniel became impossible to ignore. She was sitting in the conference room reviewing a client presentation when he walked in. Their eyes met for a brief moment, but neither of them spoke. Daniel didn't smile, but his gaze lingered a little too long. She felt the heat rise in her chest as she tried to focus on her work. But everything inside her screamed that she was standing at the edge of something big, something that could change everything. "Olivia," Daniel finally said, his voice calm, but serious. "Can we talk for a moment?" Her heart skipped a beat. She set the presentation down and stood, following him to his office. The door clicked shut behind them, and the familiar tension enveloped them again. "Sit down," Daniel said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. He stood at the window for a moment, looking out at the city, his hands clasped behind his back. Olivia could tell he was gathering his thoughts. She sat down, her hands nervously fidgeting in her lap. "What's going on, Daniel?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I'm not sure how to say this, but what happened last night, it can't happen again. Not here, not in the office. We both know that." Olivia's stomach twisted. She had known this conversation was coming, but hearing it out loud still felt like a blow. "I understand," she said, her voice calm, though inside everything felt like it was crumbling. "We're both here to do our jobs. I don't want anything to get in the way of that." Daniel's eyes softened just a fraction. "It's not that simple, Olivia. The dynamic between us, professionally, it's complicated. We both have responsibilities, and I need to make sure you know that I expect you to be the best at your job. And you've been doing great, but I can't let anything distract you from that." A lump formed in Olivia's throat as she nodded. She didn't want to lose the respect she had worked so hard to earn, but the thought of Daniel pulling away from her was just as painful. "I won't let anything interfere with my work, Daniel," she said, her voice unwavering. "You have my word." He nodded, his jaw tightening. "Good. I'm glad to hear that." He paused, then added, "But that doesn't mean we can't still—" Trailed off, his voice faltering for a moment. He cleared his throat and turned back to the window. "We'll figure it out. But for now, let's just focus on the job." Olivia swallowed hard, trying to hold back the tears that were threatening to surface. The man she had come to admire, the man she had kissed under the stars just the night before, was now telling her they couldn't be together. Not here, not now. "Understood," she said, though the weight of his words hung heavily in the air between them. For the next few days, Olivia threw herself into her work. She had no choice. She couldn't afford to let her emotions get in the way of her responsibilities. Not now. Every project she touched was executed with precision. Every presentation she delivered flawless. And yet, the more she focused on her work, the more the distance between her and Daniel seemed to grow. He was polite, professional, but cold. Their interactions were strictly business, and each time their eyes met, Olivia felt the weight of their unspoken words pressing on her chest. She couldn't deny the feeling she still had for him, nor could she ignore the fact that she missed him, missed the man who had made her feel like she was worthy of everything she had worked for. But she couldn't keep living in that space of longing. She had to let go. It wasn't easy, and every day felt like a battle. But Olivia knew what she had to do. She had to move forward, professionally, personally. It wasn't until a week later that things began to change again. The tension between Olivia and Daniel had reached a boiling point, and despite their professional walls, something had to give. Olivia had just finished presenting a new project to the senior team when she noticed Daniel standing at the back of the room, his eyes fixed on her. As the meeting broke up, she gathered her things, trying to ignore the way her heart pounded, when she saw him walking toward her. "Olivia," Daniel said quietly, his voice different this time, softer. "I've been thinking about what happened, about us." She stopped in her tracks, her breath catching in her throat. Was he about to apologize? Was this the moment when everything would finally be cleared up? "You don't have to say anything," Olivia said quickly, her voice steady despite the flutter of emotions. "I understand." Daniel shook his head. "No, you don't understand," he said, stepping closer to her. "I've been fighting this, fighting what's between us, but I can't anymore. I don't want to fight it." Her heart skipped a beat. "What are you saying?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Daniel reached out, gently cupping her face with his hand. "I'm saying that I want us to stop pretending," he murmured. "I want us to be real, together." And in that moment, with the weight of their shared past and future hanging between them, Olivia felt everything fall into place. They weren't just two people working in a high-powered office. They were two people who had found each other in a world that constantly tried to pull them apart. "Yes," Olivia said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I want that too." And with that, everything changed. Their relationship, once built on the foundations of professionalism and respect, now had the chance to grow into something more, something real. They had crossed the line, but they were no longer afraid of what that meant. Olivia's journey from intern to executive assistant at Falcon Communications shows the power of perseverance and staying true to your values. By choosing to help a stranger, she unknowingly changed her life, landing a second chance and proving that kindness and integrity open doors to unexpected opportunities. Despite the challenges of balancing her career and emotions, Olivia demonstrated that success isn't just about ambition, it's about being true to yourself. This story reminds us that when faced with tough choices, staying grounded in our principles can lead to the most rewarding outcomes. Choose what's right and the rest will follow. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe to support our channel and help us keep creating more inspiring content for you.